Good morning for all of us that are here in Brazil, and good evening for all our friends that are in the eastern side of the world. I would like to start our second webinar here from this project that we are doing here in the International Intelligence Unit in Getúlio Vargas Foundation. Is a project that we developed with the Korea Foundation to discuss global value chains, economic insertion, developments between Brazil and South Korea in a comparative perspective. We have here some reports. Let me share with you the cover of the reports. So that's the cover that reports that we just work from a couple of years right now. The report is available on our website. If you go to the description in the YouTube video that you're watching right now, you can see the link to that very report. Okay, I encourage you to go there. Also, our friends here today, let me share their presentations also, that the reports. Renato Baumann, that with us here today, also wrote our reports, the perspective of global value chain insertion, the Brazilian and South Korean models. Also, you can check the link in the description are there, so you can also access these reports. And last but not least, we have here for now South Korean friends, Joon-ho Lee, Global Value Chain, SMEs, Small and Medium Enterprises, and Policy, Korean Perspective. Also, the link is on the description on the site, on the YouTube description. So, I would like to come back here and talk to you guys a little bit about our project again. The idea of the project was to compare Brazil and South Korea, understand the development models, understand their insertions in global value chains, and of course, with all the COVID pandemics, understand a little bit how everything is going to move in the future. To do that, beyond the report, to discuss how things will be going, so we invite all the authors that contribute with our reports, and we are bringing them to discuss with us in the webinars. So I would like first to introduce my very good, new and good colleague, Dr. Joon-ho Lee, South Korean research fellow from the Korean Small Business Institute, the famous COSB. How are you, Dr. Lee?
How are you? I'm doing good. Yeah. Good morning. This is good evening, actually. This is
excellent. Evening for you. And I also would like to present and introduce my very good colleague from Getúlio Vargas Foundation and the International Intelligence Units, Dr. Renato Baumann, that's our research from our Instituto de Pesquisa Econômica Aplicada, IPEA.
Good morning. And good evening, Ms. Lee.
Excellent. So I would like to start to do one thing that I usually do in webinars, that's level the playing fields. I mean, I'd like to give the opportunity for both Renato and Lee to present some ideas that will probably be the basis for the other answers and other questions. So I'll start with Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee, both Brazil and South Korea have recently undergone an important debate about economic reforms. So what are the major themes that are on the current agenda? I mean, what are the things that in South Korea we're discussing about economic reforms, how South Korea has to move to in the economic fields?
Well, I'm not sure whether I can say this is quite recent, but the current regime, which got into the power about 3 years ago, is quite a different regime in a sense that they are calling themselves progressive ones, and the previous regimes are pretty much conservative. And this regime is, it seems like to me they are in favor of, how would you say, working classes, rather than, they may call it the capitalist group, which can be represented by large enterprises. So as soon as they get into the power, they started with some kind of economic philosophy such that SME-centered the economy they wanted to develop, and their motto was income growth or income-led economic development plan. So they, as soon as they get into the power, they increase minimum wage rate, and that they decrease the working hours and increase the corporate tax, and introduce some kind of laws that make it almost impossible for employers to lay up employees. And these, that kind of things are the ones that they introduced, quite new ones, quite a shock to our economy. So unfortunately, I don't want to say whether it was successful or not, but unfortunately, because of the current incident in the global economy, unemployment rate goes up and the growth rate goes down, and government debt goes up and things like that. So the current performance is not very good. That's what I can say. Mm-hmm.
I see. But in the sense that you're mentioning, so the current regime is more or less trying to increase the welfare state of the country, in the sense that investing more in policies toward people. But could you tell us, perhaps not the current regime, but in the last few years, in the last decades at least, is South Korea investing more internationalization? I mean, are they worried about how they are positioning themselves within the global value chains? I think that's the catch here.
I don't want to say, but it seems like to me ever since the current regime came into power, it seems like they have been sending a message to the world such that the current regime is more favorable with the working classes than the large enterprises or any other enterprises. The FDI to Korea decreased quite a lot, and of course because of the conflict between China and the United States, it seems like to me we are losing pretty much competitiveness in the global value chain that we used to enjoy in the previous years. For the past 3 years, it seems like yes, we are losing a lot of competitiveness in that sectors.
Okay, so just before sending the word back to Renato, so he can again level the playing fields in the side of Brazil, I failed to read a disclaimer. There's a very important disclaimer for the Getúlio Vargas Foundation. So the disclaimer is this: all the statements expressed by Getúlio Vargas Foundation employees and guests in your online events and broadcasts exclusively represents their opinions and not necessarily the Getúlio Vargas Foundation's institutional position. We also reiterate that everyone present here agreed to participate in these events of their own free will, and they consented to be recorded in this broadcast, which will be posted later on FTV official channels. So, done the institutional requirements. Renato, what in your opinion is the major themes on the current agenda? And again, I'm not, as I said to our friend Joon-ho, the idea is not necessarily to discuss this regime, but there is a trend in Brazil, or there is just a huge rupture and everything's changing? I mean, let's try to understand how Brazil is being positioned right now in economic terms.
Well, I would say that the word reform is the leitmotif in this country for the last, I don't know how many years. This economy has been growing around 1% per year in the last 3 or 4 years. And that takes a lot of degrees of freedom for the executive power, for the government to promote all those reforms. And what reforms are we talking about? Most of them, fiscal reforms, administrative reform, political reform, changes or improvement of the education system, improvement of infrastructure, you name it. A bunch of reforms that are needed. Now, having said that, this year was really put the Brazilian economy in a corner situation. Why so? Because at the beginning of the year, we had a fiscal deficit around 70% of GDP. Now it's expected to be around 100% or even more. But we do have a sort of straitjacket that put into, submit the government into a straitjacket. Why so? The Constitution imposes a number of non-negotiable expenditures, social programs mostly. B, this country has approved a fiscal responsibility law in year 2000 that provides some parameters for public expenditure. And C, since 2016, we have a ceiling for public expenditures. So that we are now in a situation where the coronavirus pandemic and the need to support the low-income strata of the population have required a good many amount of resources, unprecedented ones, and very much needed, as in many countries. But we depart from a position of already high fiscal deficit and a straitjacket in terms of degrees of freedom for the free use of public revenue. So that we are the margin for, say, public investment is less than 5% of revenue, which is pretty low, and particularly when you have a huge amount of excess demand of projects in infrastructure. And yet the demand for structural reforms is very much there. So the thing is, right now, the question is how to maintain the basic support for the low-income strata of the population without incurring in fiscal crime or not obeying what are what has been approved as limits for public expenditure. At the same time as it's impossible to rely upon resource transfers indefinitely. You have to sponsor the growth has to resume somehow to generate employment and improve the income of the population, so on and so forth. It's a straitjacket and it's a corner situation, and yet the reforms remain very much needed. So this year, on top of that, this year being an election year for mayors and local chambers, that makes the political scenario even more complicated to reach agreements and move on. So that's where we stand. And having said that, the indicators of on the productive sector on the positive side, probably inflated by the income transferred in those supporting emergency programs. And it's unsustainable. Those programs are unsustainable at the value that they had so far. So inevitably, you have to reduce that, and probably that will have some consequences over the pace of production from now on. So in a few words, that's the overall scenario, at least as I see it.
Excellent. Okay, so now that we discussed a little bit about the domestic economy in general from both South Korea and Brazil, let's move on a little bit to the international arena. So let's talk a little bit about global value chains. So again, I will start with Dr. Lee. Dr. Lee, concerning the future of global value chains, what are the major trends that you identify that countries should be paying more attention? I mean, what are the gaps in global value chains that we have not yet pay enough attention and perhaps try to to develop it, it's better, so we can make it more efficient, more effective. So could you enlighten us? I mean, you have some things, for instance, that you wrote for us in the report about how small and medium and small enterprises are having not been covered. So would you care to elaborate a little bit more on that?
It's a pretty much a broad subject, but talking about the current trends of GVC, it seems like to me, according to the OECD and WTO reports and things like that, the development of GVC is getting slowed down since the global financial crisis, late 2000s, is because we are facing the marginal, I mean, the merit and advantage you can get from the development of transportation and IT technologies and things like that, and the concluding FTAs, you can get all those benefits, but those benefits are getting marginal. And we are talking about the fourth industrial revolution, which is paying more attention on the artificial intelligence and 3D printing and things like that. So we don't need more, not as much as cheap labors at the third countries or something. We are facing the rise of cost at the countries like China and Southeast Asian countries. So what we are seeing is that except for Asian manufacturing house, the intra trade or inter-regional trade, you can see that the trade in the Asia is increasing a little bit, but most of the GVC activity is slowing down, and even this pandemic, it limited the labor mobility, global labor mobility, and it limited the global productions, and the economy slowed down. People are worrying about, here in Korea, worrying about the stability of the supply chain. We are, this is getting too long. But anyway, Korea is very much involved in GVC. Our proportion of intermediaries goods proportion of exports of intermediaries goods to the total of Korean export is almost 70%, which means that Korea is very deeply involved in the GVC. When there's some panic or paralyzation in the supply chain, Korea is in a very critical situation. So in these days, it seems like we have no other choice but to find the opportunities in the digitalization. And many countries are concentrating or focusing on development of digital technologies and digitalization of their economies and things like that. So the current how do you say paradigm is the distortion or a slowdown of global supply chain is quite a definite phenomenon. And we have no other choice but getting into the digitalization of the global economy and global society, things like that. That's basically what I believe.
Sure, but again, could you comment a little bit more about the role of medium and small enterprises? I mean, how are they connected, or how are they covered by the global value chains? Are they parts of this event, this trend?
Well, it all depends on which country you are in. case
South
of Korea,
South Korea, in fact.
yes, South Korea, we are losing a lot of grounds at the global value chain, especially for small and medium enterprises. Many Korean companies went out of this country to China looking for cheaper labor, because the rent and all those costs are rising in this country. But the cost or all those rents are being to be raised in China. They went to the Cambodia, Vietnam, all those Southeast Asian countries, and now their rents are increasing too. So they cannot find the merits or the advantage over in those countries. They are trying to coming back to Korea, and the Korean companies here inside of domestic inside of Korea, they don't want more usable laborers outside of this country, but they cannot find the complementary production facilities or supply chain. So this country, the SMEs are losing their ground on the, they are kind of lost in the middle of somewhere, countries over in Southeast Asian countries, and the country government is trying to introduce what we so-called the reshoring policy by providing preferential incentives for them to coming back to this country, but it is hard for them to coming back to this country. And the large enterprises in Korea is losing a lot of supply chains because the conflict between United States and China, they don't want us to have a better relationship with the other countries or something like that. So they are some kind of squeeze in between those two big global economy, and they cannot find how they are at a loss. It seems like they are at a loss how to restructure their global value chain in this period of time, something like that. Mm-hmm. So I'm just saying that we totally Korean economy is in the. You may say that we are in the middle of a transition from the manufacturing-based economy to the knowledge-based economy, or we are at a loss what to do. One of them might be our situation.
Great. So, Dr. Renato, I'll throw back to you, almost the same question. The idea is, what are the major trends you can foresee in global value chains, and perhaps how can Brazil engage some of those trends? You do not need to say all of them, but perhaps one or two that you think that's worth highlighting for our viewers.
Dr. Lee has mentioned, I think, the most important characteristics. One of them is a technological one. 3D printer, IT, digital manufacturing, and so on and so forth. There's a second one, which is there was already a trend in terms of global value chains becoming regional value chains more than global. That's another characteristics that have shown in recent years. A third one is, of course, the turning point of the 2008-2010 crisis. It's very clear that it's a turning point in terms of globalization in general, to the point that some people start to speak about deglobalization. Now that's the basic scenario. Come 2019, 2020, we have the conflict between the US and China, and that, as Dr. Lee has mentioned, has quote unquote stimulated a number of producers to relocate their productive units due to political reasons. And on top of that, 2020, year to 2020, imposed a new characteristics, which is mostly influenced by the first quarter of the year, when China just closed it down. It became clear that from now on, the decisions to operate in value chains that so far has been based on the analysis of cost structures to locate a productive unit somewhere else because the costs of production and transportation and governance within the firm is lower. Now you have a new dimension, which is geopolitics. The need to have access to the inputs required for your production process is as important, has become as important as the differential in costs. And because, why I stress that? Because if that is so, from the point of view of Latin America, Brazil in particular, our neighborhood to the United States would suggest that there might be some relocation of productive activities to somewhere closer to the headquarters of companies in the US. And hence, there might be, in the medium run, we might see some activities being installed here, that moving from other regions for this very reason of getting assured that the companies won't have any major problem in having access to their inputs. Now, having said that, there's no application form to belong to a global value chain. You have to be recognized as an economy that provides the preconditions required for belonging to a GVC, global value chain. And that brings us back, in the case of Brazil, brings us back to the issue of reforms. Of course, this economy has been open for an investment for several decades now, has significantly transparency and stability in the judicial process. The political scenario is we won't have any major crisis, at least as far as we can see. So it's relatively stable and attractive to foreign investment, but that possibly is not sufficient. So if there is a major interest to attract the relocation of productive units, something else should be done, even in terms of signaling more specifically or more explicitly the goodwill from the government or from the economic agents to participate in those value chains. But I think there is an opportunity right now, and it's a matter of doing the homework to try and fulfill those expectations.
Great. In fact, I'll talk a little bit in a 2 minutes with your opportunities. I want to go on that. But before that, you mentioned something in the beginning of your answer about how global value chains in general are regionalized. I mean, they are concentrated in regions. And yes, I mean, I think most of the literature discuss how global value chains initiates around manufacturing hubs. But there are no manufacturing hubs in Latin America. So building on your answer, I mean, do you envision a possibility of Brazil being a manufacturing hub in Latin America or perhaps South America? Not necessarily in all segments, but perhaps there are some segments that you can see that Brazil could push a little bit harder and becoming this manufacturing hub to the South American region?
Yes, in IPEA in 2015, we, together with ECLAC, the UN agency, we built the South America Input-Output Matrix. And why I mention that is because when you go to the technical coefficients, they're not all zero. There are some sectors where there already are some complementarity among South American countries. I am convinced that we have been talking about regional integration probably more than any other region in the world, even before the European Union. We started talking about that 1948, even before the Rome Treaty that created the European community. And yet, I think that the recent lessons from East Asia, Western Europe, and North America, in terms of source of competitiveness, clearly indicates that productive complementarity is one of the names of the game. I'm very convinced that we should make efforts to try and overcome the difficulties that we have so far, be it in trade barriers, be it in infrastructure constraints, you name it. But we do need a statesman view and efforts to try and build up productive complementarity so as to be able to increase competitiveness and participate in the international market in a more efficient way.
Great. So I'll go to the last question to each of one of you, and then after this last question answers, I'll move to the public because I'm already receiving some comments and questions, okay? So, Dr. Lee, first with you. Of course, there are major obstacles and opportunities always in global value chains for every country. My question to you is, in your opinion, what should be the major opportunities that South Korea should grasp to keep leading in global value chains? What would you do? What do you think that would be important to the governments, not this government perhaps, but the following governments, to enhance, to invest, to foster in South Korea so Korea could keep leading in global value chains?
I'm not sure whether we can lead the GVC or something, but of course, Samsung and some major large companies can. They may have competitiveness in their own GVC, but anyway, Korea is a small country. You should know we are exporting a lot, importing a lot, but small is a very small country. We cannot affect the global economy. The global economy affect us. Our integration into GVC level is very high, and any problem in supply chain, we cannot produce. For example, Japan, when they had the earthquake, we had trouble supplying core parts and components. When Japanese government banned core parts and components exported to this country, we had problem. And China is the #1 exporting country of Korea. About 29% of Korean export goes to China. We are importing about 20-something% from China. We are exporting the United States is second biggest exporting country in terms of country of destination of export, which means that we have no other choice but to adapt to the global trend. How well we can align to the paradigm change, or how well we can adapt to the paradigm change of global economy or global paradigm shift is very, very critical one for us to you may say lead the GVC that we are involved in, or survive the GVC we are involved in. For that, one very very fortunate thing is that we have pretty good digital infrastructure. I mean, the service sector is not very good, but at least hardware, in terms of hardware, Korea is very well structured with the digital infrastructure, IT infrastructure, I would say. And definitely the world is getting into a digital economy. It seems like that's the apparent and irreversible trend of the global value chain and the global economy. We have no other choice but to concentrate on converging our competitiveness in the IT or digital sector with the service sector, which we are not very competitive. But that would be the main point for Korea to survive in the changing GVC or something like that. Mm-hmm.
Excellent, thank you. So, Dr. Renato, we are not in Brazil, of course, one of the leaders in global value chains. In fact, I think we all know for a long time, and have discussed for a long time, how Brazil is as a proportion of its economy, is so little integrated in the international economy. So, in your opinion, I mean, of course, aside from all those reforms that Brazil is struggling right now, what should be, in your opinion, the right measures, or perhaps the best suited reforms, and what part of those reforms that could enhance Brazil's standing in global value chains? Perhaps not only integrating itself, but leapfrogging some of the issues that we have to left behind because of the new trends.
When we talk about Brazil and global value chains, the first thing to say is that our participation is not zero. Brazil does has some participation in global value chains, but as I normally say, from the back door. We provide raw material for productive structures, and that's not that noble. That's not what we would suggest. Having said that, the second point that we have to take into account is that being an economy rich in natural resources, we have natural competitive advantage in some areas, such as, for instance, steel production and pulp production, continuous productive processes that cannot simply participate in global value chains. And hence, we will never probably have the same share of participation in global value chains as, say, Korea and other East Asian countries. So having said that, the target should be something less ambitious than what we observe in East Asian indicators. What can we do for that? Well, one thing that is the one I just mentioned, which is foster productive complementarity with our neighboring countries. Second is a more proactive policy of attraction of foreign investment. And that's a whole Pandora box of items to be taken into account. And that goes from the fiscal reform to proactive work of the ombudsman for foreign investors, and in between a number of other issues, infrastructure, the design of what is a better model of international participation for the Brazilian economy, something that's unknown so far. What exactly is it that we want? And what the years 2019, 2020 has brought in terms of the conflict between US and China, one thing that characterizes Brazilian diplomacy historically and should be preserved more than anything else is its aspect of global trader or global relationship. Neutrality is the name of the game. the worst thing that can happen to us and to any other smaller economy is to take part and goes with opt for adhering to one partner and eliminate or reduce the partnership with the other one. I think that's more than anything else in the short run is something that we must have present and take very seriously the great value of neutrality.
Excellent. So we have already some questions here. The first one is, South Korea has grown a lot because of the media. We see that through its music and movies. Through its music and movies. Do you have any bets for Brazil to grow? So how did the media, it somehow connects with technology. I mean, how the media has been one of the engines of growth in South Korea and how Brazil can also benefit from it. This question came with a follow-up comments with, in my opinion, it's amazingly important. Is perhaps a good investment would be to invest in a younger group of the population. I mean, invest in child and well, invest in education. I mean, that's I think what's the other person here is willing to say, which I think is the basis of everything that we're discussing here. So, Renato, do you think that Brazil has how to benefit from its media, from the music sector, from the movie sectors, to use as an engine to grow? I mean, can you see that?
The cultural aspect or the cultural industry in Brazil is, of course, one where we have very, very strong competitive advantage. Okay. It has exports have been going on for quite some time, and this is a very strong sector, a very strong, a powerful sector. To the extent that it can move the whole productive structure, it's debatable. I mean, it's not that big, and it's not the what in economics we call the multiplier effect is definitely not so big. The media thing, one of the characteristics of the Brazilian media, of our culture, Brazilians' culture, is this very strong tendency to try and diminish and complaint about what is going on. I mean, the typical news in Brazilian media is negative with regard to the country, as different from other countries where I live, for instance, in Chile, where even though it's very small and limited and so on, it is always, I don't say nationality, I don't know how to classify that, but the positive aspects are more stressed than the negative ones. And it's a strong characteristics of our media to do the opposite. Mm-hmm. We are critical more than anything, not on the media, we are ourselves are critical more than constructive. And I think that it should be just about time to reverse that trend. That would be most helpful, in particular in this situation where we are facing so many constraints.
Well, I think probably the question is direct to the idea of the K-pop phenomenon, which is in my opinion, a very unique phenomenon. So it's difficult to emulate that in any other country. So, Dr. Lee, would you care to share some very few ideas about how the K-pop phenomenon has been a powerhouse of economic growth in South Korea?
That's a mystery for me too. Well, one thing that I can say is that this country, you need to understand the situation of this country. This is a very small country. I don't know the size. You won't be able to imagine the size of this country, especially the country is divided by north and south, and the South Korea probably should be much smaller than one state of Brazil. We have how many people? no, 50 million population. Yes, 50 million. So this country is full with people. I mean, too many people are living in a small country. So, what will happen in that case? Everybody trying to go out of this country, and they, looking for a way they can get something out of this country, or they can sell something out of this country. And the youngsters are very open or very sensitive to how to say the information they can get from the outside of this country. So it seems like to me just how to say the society is letting them to do what they want to do. Whatever you want to do, and there's a how to say market mechanism which is accelerating that kind of a tendency. They can how to say there's so many business opportunities that people are trying to find at the any sectors that they never thought of. But I mean, how can I explain it? Just another way. Just people are trying to find every single business opportunity in whatever the sector is. That might be correct. So what I'm saying is that the entertainment company is very busy for looking for new talents, and governments are supporting how to develop those Korean cultures and things like that. So it seems like to me the nature of Korean society and the business activity in this country and the policy of the Korean government all together seems like to me made it possible for them to have to introduce the BTS to the world and the Parasite to the world or something like that. I think I'm too old for the BTS, but it seems like to me quite a miracle.
Great, no problem. In fact, it's a very interesting phenomenon happening in South Korea. There is also a question here to Dr. Baumann. Do you believe that the current Mercosur and EU agreement can benefit Brazil with a better insertion in GVCs, or does it strengthen the character of domestic value added to Brazil exports? So does it the Mercosur EU agreements could help Brazil in its insertion in GVCs, or perhaps only will heterofeed our tendencies of exporting commodities and everything?
Well, the Mercosur European Union agreement, if it comes to sunlight any day, it will impose a very strong number of effects, a huge number of effects, both on the Brazilian economy, on the Mercosur economies, as well as on the European economies. So why so? Because it's the biggest trade agreement ever in number of member of countries participating in that exercise. And our trade pattern with the European Union is very much a kind of north-south type of trade. We export raw material, or not so products with not so much value added or degrees of transformation, and import manufacturers. That's in a few words, that's what characterizes our trade with Europe, which has been falling, for that matter, in terms of participation. Now, having said that, the freer access to a huge market such as the Western European one, A, and B, a sophisticated market. It's not only that there are demand for manufactured goods, but it's a market with a high level of per capita income, and hence a market sought from suppliers from all over the world. And hence the degree of competition is pretty high. That will impose to our producers the challenge of having to keep up in terms of productivity and competitiveness. To the extent that is a precondition to participate in value chains, well, the answer would be yes. There might be some stimuli to operate here in terms of sharing or participating in value chains. It's not a precondition, it's not take for granted, but it opens up a huge number of possibilities. And of course, together with that, a huge number of challenges as well. But the chances are not zero that we might increase our participation in value chains, provided that we do our homework south of the equator. Something to be seen.
Sure. Dr. Lee, please.
Yes. Speaking of, concluding FTA or opening your market to the global economies, such as Mercosur with the European Union or something like that. In case of Korea, we concluded FTA with the United States and China, European Union, 10 years ago, something like that. At that time, we had a lot of huge demonstration against that kind of FTAs, conclusion of FTAs with the big economies. But I am very much sure as a result of those FTAs, our economy had a better chance to grow faster and bigger. That's I'm very sure. But the one thing, as a government, you should know that you cannot avoid this. Some of your industry will lose competitiveness from the global competition. So the government should be, very well prepared for that kind of things. But the FT itself, you cannot go back from that kind of trends. That's one of the must thing you should do, from the standpoint of government for the development of your economy. That's what I would like to add on that.
If I may add to those wise words by Dr. Lee, there is one aspect that we have to take into account, which is the very fact that in the Southern Cone, Brazil, Chile, Argentina, Uruguay, most of the stock of foreign investment is European, as different from the rest of Latin America. And hence, European companies have been here for more than a century. And that might be something to take into account, that might have some consequence from the moment this agreement starts to operate. Just loose idea. I mean, it's not, again, not take for granted, but one dimension that should be considered. Possibly there might be a peculiar way of entering in that market once the barriers are overcome. Maybe.
But I think, Renato, your point is very important because, yes, in the case of Brazil, I don't have the numbers here, but the biggest manufacturing companies, well, some of the biggest are, of course, Americans, but also Europeans. I mean, Germany, Spain, Italy, France, they have huge manufacturing companies in Brazil. So perhaps this could be an interesting an avenue to enhance GVC. So I think it's again a unique model that we have to think a little bit about. It's how to take advantage of this specific setting in Brazil.
If I may add, according to central bank statistics, until recently, I haven't come across the latest figure, but the percentage of intra-firm trade is already significant in our external trade. So there is margin for some hope that one of the sub-products or one of the outcomes of that treaty is a multiplier effect in unknown directions, in positive ones.
Mm-hmm.
We are moving to the end, towards the end. So I have one question here for Dr. Lee. Considering FDI, foreign direct investment, as a central in maintaining Korea's preeminence in GVCs, what can the country do to attract this type of investments? Since in the recent years has been even milder. I mean, since FDI have been slowing down, how can the country attract more FDI to push its manufacturing sector, its insertion in international economy?
That's a well. In my opinion, we should set the message to the world such that we are in favor of, more than doing business, such as we will support the flexibility in the labor markets and things like that, and the reducement of corporate tax. Just the conditions for doing business. That's the most important thing. The FDI is a result of a market mechanism. People, if they find the chance in this country, they will invest in this country and get the benefits or get the profits. Businessmen always want to profit. Global enterprise want profit. Why they are coming in this country? They want profit in this country by exploiting some kind of resources or whatever that is. The problem is how to use them is our problem. I always believe. How can we? What can we learn from the FDI? A lot of people are afraid of inflow of FDIs and exploiting the resources and the labors in this country. But I do believe that open our market, let them do the business as free as they want to, and getting some lessons from them. That's what I want to do. But I don't want to get into the politics. But right now, it seems like to me we are sending a little bit different message to the world. That's why this might be one of the reasons that we are getting less inflow FDI to this country. Hope it's a little bit hard to specifically talk about these kind of things, but I hope you can get what I'm trying to deliver.
It's very clear.
Yes.
It's very clear. Thank you. So the last question from the public is, I'll send them to Renato to make it balanced. Is technology the best way to join GVCs? So you somehow said a little bit about, so can you just give a message to complement the answer in this last question? Is technology the best way to join GVCs?
Technology is necessary, but not sufficient.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, you cannot think of participating in GVCs unless you have efficient transportation efficient data processing, data transmission, efficient governance of productive units in more than one country. So it goes without saying that a number of technologies are a basic condition, but definitely not a sufficient one.
Excellent. So we are ready to break through the barrier of 1 hour. So to finish, I would like to ask each of you to just send a message. So people that are viewing here us today, what they cannot go and forget the moments they close down this window. I mean, what are the messages that you think that should be in their minds after this debate? Renato, what do you think would be your message?
My two messages would be the importance of promoting productive complementarity in the neighborhood, and B, sticking to neutrality in terms of external policy. I think this is what is needed for us, and of course the reforms they are a necessary tool as well.
Excellent messages. Dr. Lee, your message for closing the debates.
Well, the economy, the global economy, market mechanism is the most important game of the rule. That's what I want to emphasize. And the second one is that the digitalization, be aware of the digitalization of the world economy, world society, whatever that is. That's you should remember. You know.
Okay. So thank you, everybody. Thank you, Renato, for being with us here. Thank you, Joon-ho Lee, for being with us here. Thank you for all my team from International Intelligence Units from FGV. Thank you for the guys from the communication departments in FGV that make everything here possible. Thank you for all of you that are viewing us here right now and in the following days after the debates. Again, good morning for all of us here in Brazil, and good evening for all of us in South Korea. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye then.